Jujutsu Kaisen's curse techniques come in all shapes and sizes, from physics-shattering explosions to mediocre healing, and one of the ways these abilities can manifest is as Shikigami, which are essentially a creature that can be controlled by its sorcerer. But even within Shikigami, their abilities and strengths can vary a ton. So today, we're explaining every single Shikigami that appears in Jujutsu Kaisen, and at the end I'll tell you which Shikigami I believe is the strongest. The first Shikigami we have to talk about is actually Rika. No, not that Rika, this Rika. What's the difference? Well, that Rika is the cursed spirit from Jujutsu Kaisen 0 that has an immeasurable amount of cursed energy and a penchant for chaos. This Rika is more of a tool. After Rika was freed by Yuta, she returned to him in the form of a Shikigami, kind of like a Clingy X or a Pokemon that you try to release that has an HM that you need. Rika aids in Yuta's usage of his curse technique, Copy, and aids him in combat in general. In terms of his technique, Rika assists Yuta by storing additional curse techniques that his brain can't handle. This is because a sorcerer's brain can only handle at most 3 to 4 curse techniques at one time, and with a curse technique like Copy, you definitely want to be able to use more than just 3 or 4. On top of this, Rika also stores additional cursed energy for Yuta to use when he wants to. Both of these pieces of Rika can only be accessed by Yuta when they are fully connected, which Yuta can do by putting on his ring and saying, "Rika, give me everything." This connection only lasts for 5 minutes though, so it's not obscenely broken. But even without this connection, Rika is still very useful as she's quite strong on her own, as she was able to destroy a bridge and restrained 2 of Sukuna's arms, although that was when he was in a slightly weakened state. She also makes any fight against Yuta a 2v1, which gives Yuta an automatic advantage. Like all Shikigami though, she does have a limit to her strength, and if she takes too much damage, she will collapse. We don't know the circumstances behind Rika's regeneration, but it does take a ton of damage to destroy her in the first place, so it's not like this is a huge limitation. Next we have Junpei's Shikigami, Moondredge. This Shikigami is a cool looking jellyfish that is pretty mediocre. It seems to have 2 main uses. First, it can poison its opponents with these 2 peg things, but it's hard to peg down exactly how strong this poison is, as we only saw it used on non-sorcerers who it was highly effective against, and Yuji who was immune to it because of Sukuna being in his body. But considering even the non-sorcerers didn't die from the poison, it seems this was just as weak as Junpei was. The other use for this Shikigami is as a cushion to block attacks and prevent fall damage. This seems like the better of Moondredge's 2 applications, as it was able to brace Junpei's fall from multiple stories up, and it had no issue absorbing Yuji's punches either, which is pretty impressive. The Shikigami also makes this cute purring noise, but that's really all that's notable. Like I said, it's a pretty mediocre Shikigami, but it's not the worst one in the show. We'll be talking about that one later. For now, it's time to talk about the 10 Shikigami from the 10 Shadows technique. This technique makes up the bulk of the Shikigami we're going to be talking about today, and honestly, none of them are bad. They all range from pretty solid to absolutely broken. So let's get started with Divine Dogs. Divine Dogs are the only Shikigami in the 10 Shadows technique that the user is given. All the other Shikigami must be tamed in ritualistic battle before a user can use them in battle for themselves. But this doesn't mean they're weak. If anything, they seem to be on the stronger side. This pair of dogs is mainly used for offense, as they are very effective at dispatching weaker cursed spirits. Both also have an amazing sense of smell, with the white one being able to sniff out cursed spirits and remember the scent of doors somehow. I suspect the white dog has a sense of smell relating to cursed energy in general, which is why it was able to do this, and the black one just has a regular sense of smell. When one of the dogs is killed, its power and abilities get passed to the other. This is an attribute that all of the 10 Shadows share, but we've only seen it applied to the dogs when the white dog was killed. This combines the 2 dogs into Divine Dog's totality, which is much stronger than either dog is individually. Whereas the previous white dog was instantly killed by the Finger Bearer, Totality is capable of doing massive damage to Finger Bearers and even to cursed spirits that are on the higher end of the special grade, like Hanami. This is likely because it does have the power of 2 Shikigami put into one, but it could also be that Megumi's interpretation of Totality was much stronger than the individual parts, as the strength of a shadow is dependent on the interpretation of the user. This is most notable with the next Shikigami, Nue, who seemed like one of the weaker Shikigami under Megumi, but under Sukuna was way more powerful and also much larger. It's like the difference between Zapdos and Zekrom. Anyway, under Megumi's interpretation, Nue is essentially an electrified bird. It is mainly used for attacking in a hit-and-run style of offense, with its electricity being able to stun weaker opponents. This stun does not work on cursed spirits at Hanami's level or higher though, so it's definitely not that strong. Nue is also extremely helpful when it comes to attacking flying enemies, as it is obviously capable of flying itself, and its electrification can also knock them out of the sky due to its paralyzing effects. Nue is also used by Megumi to carry him short distances and break his fall, but it's not strong enough to carry people outright. On the Sukuna side of things, Nue is obviously much larger, and this form is also capable of creating lightning strikes in a huge area. We don't know exactly how strong these strikes are, but they it didn't seem to do any damage to Maki or Takeba. Sukuna's Nue was also capable of flying with the weight of 2 people on it, and was central in the forming of Ajito, which we will be talking about later. For now though, we have to talk about Great Serpent, which is one of the Shikigami we don't know a lot about. It seems like its main purpose is restraining opponents so Megumi and his other Shikigami can easily attack, but it's hard to say if that's its intentional usage or just how Megumi used it, because immediately after it was used, Sukuna destroyed it, and we never saw Sukuna use it individually. This brings us to Toad, or sorry, this Toad. While not as cool as Toadstool, Megumi's Toad is still pretty cool. It mostly acts as a support unit, using its long tongue to ensnare opponents and rescue allies from a distance which it can fit into its large mouth. Toad can also be summoned as several smaller toads instead of one big one. These can surprisingly support the whole weight of a fully grown adult with no issues, and can even act offensively in very specific circumstances. Toad is also one of the few Shikigami used in a combination Shikigami, as we see him combine it with Nue to summon the Well's Unknown Abyss. These smaller variations are highly mobile, mostly thanks to their wings, and they can even give the 10 Shadows user increased mobility as well. Using this combination Shikigami also prevents Nue and Toad from being completely destroyed, making them kind of indestructible. This is extremely similar to our next Shikigami, Rabbit Escape. Technically, we see Max Elephant before Rabbit Escape, but this transition is just too good to pass up. Rabbit Escape is yet another support Shikigami, and it manifests as a huge swarm of rabbits that distracts the opponent. Unlike Toad, which is only indestructible under certain circumstances, Rabbit Escape is always indestructible, as there are a near infinite amount of rabbits because of how little cursed energy they take to form. In the anime, we did see these rabbits fight against Toji, but this whole sequence was not in the manga, so it's not technically canon. Okay, now let's talk about Max Elephant. Max Elephant is the largest Shikigami in the 10 Shadows technique. It is an offensive unit, and when it was first introduced, it appeared that its main purpose was to spew large amounts of water from its trunk. This water is expelled with a huge amount of force, as it was easily able to send Kamo flying through a wall. However, instead of this water spewing ability, we mainly see Max Elephant used as a weight, as it is dropped on a number of characters like the Inverse Guy, Reggie, and Yozuru later in the manga. It is also revealed to us during the Gojo and Sukuna fight that the water from the elephant can be summoned independently of the elephant itself, as we see Sukuna use it in a similar manner to piercing blood. This makes it seem like it might be possible to use the abilities of other Shikigami without summoning them, but we have no confirmation on this. From here we move into the manga, where we have 2 new Shikigami that Sukuna tames. The first is Piercing Bull, an offensive Shikigami that gets stronger the longer it runs in one direction. We don't know exactly how strong this gets or how fast it gets strong, but it did seem to do decent damage to Yozuru's armor with very little charge up. This Shikigami also brings up the discussion of summoning Shikigami partially, which Sukuna does to increase their range and prevent their destruction. But it does come with a drawback, as the Shikigami that are only partially summoned cannot act independently, and also lack the offensive strength that the fully formed ones have. The other Shikigami we see from Sukuna is Round Deer. Round Deer is the best support Shikigami in the 10 Shadows, as it heals itself through reverse curse technique and heals the user when they come in contact with it. Because its reverse curse technique is so powerful, it can even neutralize the cursed energy it comes in contact with, as we saw it neutralizing Yozuru's cursed energy that was in her liquid metal. This Shikigami's healing abilities were also central to Ajito maintaining its health, but we'll talk about that in a second. Before we do, it's time to talk about the big guy. The reason you probably clicked on this video, Mahoraga. Mahoraga is by far the best Shikigami in the 10 Shadows technique, which is saying something considering the rest aren't bad, as we've been exploring. Mahoraga's main ability is being able to adapt to any and all phenomena, which includes cursed techniques and non-cursed energy-based attacks. This adaptation allows the Shikigami to counter pretty much any opponent, and it is one of the few ways to get through infinity. By experiencing an attack, Mahoraga automatically gains information on it and adapts to it via the turn of its wheel. Just this one turn allows Mahoraga to become resistant to the technique or completely immune to it, depending on the complexity of the technique, with more complicated techniques requiring more and more turns. I believe the most turns we saw in this series was 5 turns for Infinite Void, but honestly that's not even a ton of turns, and that's not where it stops. Once Mahoraga adapts to an ability, it does not stop adapting. It keeps learning about the technique in order to better counter it. This aspect directly led to the defeat of Gojo, as Mahoraga continued to adapt to his infinity, inventing Strong Dismantle in the process. On top of this, Mahoraga also carries the Sword of Extermination, which is imbued with positive energy, meaning it can cut down any cursed spirits in one slash. Mahoraga is also just a great fighter in general, being able to keep up with 15 Finger Sukuna with little issue, and completely completely decimating Yozuru, who is another pretty strong sorcerer. So how can this beast even be killed if it's strong enough to beat special grade sorcerers and adapt to any ability? Well, the only way to kill it is to kill it with one strong attack that it hasn't adapted to yet, as this will kill it in one shot, preventing its adaptation from activating. From what we've seen, this has to be around as strong as Hollow Purple or Sukuna's Fire Arrow, and abilities like this are not common in Jujutsu Kaisen. Luckily, only one 10 Shadows user in the entire history of 10 Shadows users has been able to tame this Shikigami, and that was Sukuna, who doesn't even really count. So for 99% of opponents, this Shikigami will not even need to be considered. And believe it or not, we still have 2 more Shikigami to talk about in the 10 Shadows technique. The next one being Ajito. Ajito is not one Shikigami but 4 combined into one to increase its strength. It is a combination of Nue, Round Deer, Great Serpent, and Morn Tiger. The main key to this Shikigami combination is Round Deer, as the Shikigami gives it high healing capabilities. This means it also has to be killed in one shot like Maharaga, but luckily its defenses are much weaker than Maharaga's. It mostly attacks with hand-to-hand combat, charging its hits with electricity. But honestly, we don't see that much of it because Gojo kills it in one hit like one chapter after it's constructed. This leaves us with Morn Tiger as the final Shikigami in the 10 Shadows, and we know nothing about it. The only time it was ever even mentioned was in this one panel when it was named as a piece of Ajito. We really have no idea what it does or how it works. Okay, let's finally move on from the 10 Shadows technique, and we'll be moving from some of the strongest Shikigami in existence to the undisputed weakest, because we have to talk about the Shikigami that belonged to the Hidden Inventories guy. This guy was an assassin in the Hidden Inventories arc who made use of 2 Shikigami. He seemed like an experienced sorcerer as he did fully analyze Geto in like 2 seconds, but we don't know what his Shikigami actually do because Geto absolutely annihilated him. They do look pretty weak visually, but it's hard to say if that's actually a good measure of strength. Next up, we have a couple of domain-based Shikigami. This one is Death Swarm. Death Swarm is the sure hit in Dagon's domain. This sure hit launches Shikigami at an opponent that do not appear until they make contact with the target. These Shikigami seem to vary in strength depending on their size, but the stronger ones can do major damage to a strong grade 1 sorcerer like Nanami or even Naobito. Dagon is also capable of summoning Shikigami apart from Death Swarm when in his domain. These Shikigami, however, do appear before they make contact with the target, so they can be defeated very easily. The other domain-based Shikigami is Judge Man. But before we get into him, please consider subscribing. Look, if you're this far into the video, you obviously enjoy the content. Subscribing helps this channel out a ton, but more than that, it also helps my pitiful self-esteem. So if you care about either of those or just enjoy the video, please subscribe. It's hard to understand what Judge Man does without understanding Higuruma's domain, so let's go over that very quickly. Higuruma's domain is deadly sentencing. It is essentially a court case where Higuruma is the prosecution and the opponent is the defendant. Judge Man will choose a random crime that the defendant may or may not have committed, and it is the defendant's job to prove their innocence without a shadow of a doubt. After both sides make their case, Judge Man will produce evidence that is supposed to assist Higuruma, but neither party actually knows what the evidence is until it is presented. This evidence will make or break the defendant, as it can seal their fate or give them a chance to rebuke. Once the cycle is complete, it is up to Judge Man to pass a verdict down onto the defendant. There are 3 verdicts that we know exist. There's Guilty Confiscation, which removes the opponent's curse technique or their cursed energy if they have no curse technique, or the curse technique on a cursed weapon that they have instead of their curse technique. There's Guilty Confiscation plus Death Penalty, which is the same as Confiscation, except Higuruma also gains access to the Executioner's Sword, which can kill anyone it touches in one hit. And finally, there's Innocent. We actually haven't seen an innocent verdict, but it has to exist for the court to have integrity. This is Judge Man's entire role as a Shikigami, making it the only Shikigami to have no direct combat applications, which is pretty cool and makes sense for a Shikigami that is supposed to represent a neutral party. We only have 2 more Shikigami to talk about, and the next one is Daruves, which we don't know a ton about because he kind of got off-screened. We know they circled him and protected him and were strong enough to scare off Kuroushi due to a bad matchup, but that's literally all we know. So let's move on to the final Shikigami we're introduced to, Garuda. Garuda is the Shikigami belonging to Yuki Tsukumo, and much like Yuki herself, we don't get to see Garuda a lot because, well, you know. Regardless, it is a pretty cool and pretty simple Shikigami. Its main strength is that Yuki can apply her Star Reach technique to it. This makes the knockoff Rayquaza far more massive than it usually is. This mass allows it to ignore concepts generated by opposing sorcerers and cursed spirits, and by extension, it can even in theory one-shot any cursed spirit it comes in contact with. This by default makes it among the strongest Shikigami in the show, but strength isn't the only thing that makes Garuda a good Shikigami. It is also extremely flexible. We see it used in 3 ways during its 3 chapters of usage. The first is as a soccer ball to one-shot Kenny's cursed spirit, the second was as a restraint which was used to keep Kenjaku in place while both Yuki and Chozo laid into him, and the third was when he was used as a whip to do massive damage to the Star Corridor. But Garuda does have some flaws. The Shikigami must be fueled by Yuki's cursed energy, so if she has to use her cursed energy for something else, like reverse curse technique, it reduces the mass applied to Garuda. This isn't a huge drawback, but it can change the flow of battle like we saw against Kenjaku. So who is the strongest Shikigami in Jujutsu Kaisen? Really, there are only 2 names that we need to discuss if we're talking about strength: Mahoraga and Garuda. This might be a hot take, but I think without any adaptations, Garuda might have more raw power than Mahoraga. But even with more power, I think Mahoraga is still the strongest Shikigami. Its utility and potential power are just much higher. Sure, if they went to battle in a head-to-head, Garuda could probably force a tie if it turned into a black hole, but we don't even know if it can do that or if that was just a Yuki thing, so it might not even be possible. It just has to be Mahoraga, and we all know that's the case. And that's all of them. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe and join the Discord. It would really mean a lot to me, and it would help this channel out as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.